talk about dealing with the designated doctor under the new rules. Not really new rules, but the most current rules. And there's a few little bon mots out there that the division has tossed out there secondary to the pandemic. As you know, we have a new crop of designated doctors. And for those of you who are as far away from your 18th birthday as I am, you remember Dr. Fine, Dr. Howard, and Dr. Fine. After reading a number of these designated doctor reports, I'm absolutely convinced it is written by this eminent crew of providers. The first part is requesting a designated doctor appointment. The most recent rules were amended as of November 4, 2018. Pretty much no change. There's just a few minor points that you should be familiar with relative to the entire process. The designated doctor can address basically 5 topics. This would include impairment rating, maximum medical improvement, the extent of injury, disability, and return to work, or other similar issues, which is not clearly defined in either the statute or the rule. And candidly, in all my years of doing this, I've never seen any specific criteria under that particular item. Newsflash. In March 2020, the designated doctor examinations were halted as the governor put a halt on all state businesses secondary to the national pandemic. No appointments were scheduled, nothing was carried out. In June 2020, limited designated doctor appointments were scheduled to allow for an assessment of maximum medical improvement and impairment. A week later, June 22nd, allowed for post-DD RME evaluations. And as we'll talk about in a few minutes, there are limitations to these examinations, and that issues of disability and return to work are not being sent out to be evaluated by designated doctor. And under very limited situations, issues about are extended. Requesting a designated doctor, the first question you need to ask yourself is, what do you want from the designated doctor examination? As you all know, the number of physicians, osteopaths, MDs, etc., participating in the designated doctor program has dropped precipitously. At one time, there were over 1,500 providers doing designated doctor examinations. Now, it's less than 200 for physicians, and the biggest majority of designated doctors are chiropractors. So the question becomes, what do you want from a designated doctor examination given those criterion and what you're going to see in terms of the narrative report? Is there a change of condition? This can happen. At times people get better, sometimes sooner relative to what is expected, and sometimes longer. But if there's a change in conditioning, a worsening condition, or if the requesting provider has determined that degenerative arthritis of the knee is now, open quote, post-traumatic osteoarthritis that requires a total knee arthroplasty, is that my pathology, and can that be resolved prior to you paying for that surgery? Does the clinical record report a change in the current diagnosis list? No two ways about it. Healthcare is expensive. Health insurance, even more expensive. This is not to say that the injured employee does not have significant issues relative to their health insurance. And of course, everything becomes a compensable injury. One of my personal favorites is that, oh, I didn't have back pain before and I have back pain now. Therefore, all the pathology in my spine is because I bent over to pick an ice cube up off the floor. Right. I think the question they ask this individual is, and I found myself doing this, is, do you make your father's noise? What? I found this out about 10 years ago. I was getting out of bed one morning and I made my father's noise. Scared the bejesus out of me, but it happens. We get older. As we get older, we tend to deteriorate and degenerate. My spine today is not the spine I took with me into the Army when I was 18 years old. So therefore, is the current clinical record demonstrating a change in the diagnosis And is that change a function of your injury? And that's where the extent of injury aspect of the designated doctor protocol comes into play. Be very cognizant of what has been deemed compensable. We all know that some providers tend to expand the pathology to everything available, and it's because of the injury. Oh, he aggravated it, he exacerbated it. Their personal philosophies of the workers' comp injury is responsible in some regard for every piece of pathology is prevalent in a number of providers. But if the compensability has been determined, make sure the designated doctor understands what has been compensable, what's been deemed compensable, and what his limitations are. I'm sorry that we all have arthritis and we're all getting older, but it's not because we had a minor compensable injury. And of course, the designated doctor needs to know other administrative issues regarding the employer or network situations, political subdivisions, or the findings of separate and other designated doctor evaluations. Please complete all the forms completely. I know this sounds kind of very pedantic and basic, but I'm here to tell you fines have been levied for an adjuster who forgot to check off a box. They didn't complete the form completely, and the division, in their infinite wisdom, issued a fine. I'm fairly certain, given our current economic status in this country, that you don't want to pay any more money to the Division of Workers' Compensation. There are some changes to the rule 127 A through G. You must note the statutory date of maximum medical improvement if you're seeking a determination of maximum medical improvement. The injury may have occurred 2 months ago and statutory MMI is not on the horizon. However, the division wants you to fill that space in. So when you're completing those 32 forms, make sure that data is there. If you're seeking an impairment rating only, and I would suggest you seek impairment ratings and not determinations of maximum medical improvement, take that little bailiwick out of the hands of the designated doctor. If you're seeking a determination of impairment rating only, state the accepted date of maximum medical improvement. That's crucial. Don't let the non-physician provider determine, oh, he's not at maximum medical improvement because he's only had 34 sessions of physical therapy when the ODG allows for 36 sessions. Candidly, folks, nothing is going to change in those 2 sessions, but you don't want them going back for another designated doctor appointment 5 months from now because for whatever reason it doesn't happen, and you're paying tips for that additional 5 months. If it's impairment rating only, let them know what the date of maximum medical improvement is. The extent of the compensable injury. Now, we're going to talk about this in a few minutes. However, you can provide a cumulative impact analysis, a complete summary of the medical record. Make sure that the designated doctor has as complete as possible a description of the actual compensable event. We all know that it's astonishing that somebody who bent over to pick up a pencil from his desk chair, by the time he gets to the designated doctor, he was picking up 14 tons of lead paint. You know, it's astonishing how the extent of the injury expands as the case goes on to make it a much more traumatic event to justify the overall symptomology. Disability. This is asterisk for a reason. At this time, as far as I could tell from the DWC website, designated doctors will not be addressing disability. So don't even try to ask for this in a designated doctor appointment. It will not be endorsed. However, when the time comes, and hopefully soon, the South African variant notwithstanding, hopefully soon, that you need to outline the beginning and end dates of disability as you understand them. Return to work. When can this individual return to work in a restricted duty situation? Clearly, that goes to the definition of disability. However, these dates have to be clearly delineated for the designated doctor, and it serves your interest so that he has specific dates and is not arbitrarily deciding on when this individual can return to work. Are they eligible for SIBs? Again, the DWC under Commissioner's Bulletin B-0030-20 specifically notes that the commission is not allowing a designated doctor for these three separate issues. So if it's a SIBS issue, I'm sorry, you've got to resolve this somehow, but not in the designated doctor process. There's a whole rule on what the division shall deny the request for an appointment. Not think about, not consider, shall deny. That's a key word in the whole legal ethic. If any requirement of the requesting process is not met, the division shall deny the request for an appointment. I believe that's a little draconian, but that's what's written in the statute. My job here is to tell you what you have to be aware of. Is the request in violation of 408-0041, 123, or 151? Again, you need a cursory understanding of the statute, particularly these three sections of the statute, so you can understand that if you're in violation, then the division shall deny the appointment. If the individual who is scheduling the appointments feels that the request is, and this is their quote, frivolous, not defined anywhere. What does frivolous mean? And, you know, if you ask Benny Hill, it's a whole different situation. But the reality is they can apply. If they decide they don't want to give a designated doctor appointment because they think it's frivolous, irrespective of what your determination or veracity of the request is for, they can deny it. And they shall deny it as per the statute. They shall deny a request for a designated doctor if compensability is disputed and that dispute is not resolved. The designated doctor cannot speak to maximum medical improvement or impairment rating if issues of compensability are still on the table. Rule 127.5, there's no real changes. The division shall make the assignments. They get to pick who they want to pick. The difficulty is location, local field offices, and those providers who want to participate in the designated doctor program. We're going to talk about training in a few minutes, and it's made it much more difficult, as has the testing. And as we talked about a moment ago, the number of providers is drastically reduced, and that makes it much more challenging. However, the assignment is to be made within 10 days of the received and completed request. Again, another issue, if they find that you didn't check off box 12B-C, they send it back and the whole process starts again. And right now the division is working out of their house. The whole process is slow just on that basis alone. So obviously you want to get this designated doctor thing resolved as quickly as possible. Make sure you do it right the first time. What you need to do is make sure that this provider, the designated doctor selected, is appropriately qualified. There is a lot of discussion. I've talked to several attorneys about this, and they have a real hard time because there are specific criterion that would exclude or qualify an individual from being a designated doctor. And given the distribution of providers, it can be a challenge to get the right guy to talk to your particular issue. Again, refer to Rule 127.130, and you can find the qualifications. The next part of that rule is focus on disqualifying associations. We're going to talk more about that in a few minutes, but as an example, I was reviewing a chart and we noted that the designated doctor was a partner to an individual who did a review for the carrier and did a review, and then the same guy did a review for the treating doctor. I think he was acting as a doctor selected in lieu of and did the impairment rating. So this one guy was playing both ends against the middle, and yet his partner was selected as a designated doctor. Once I pointed that out to the attorney, boom, that guy was taken off because his report was really kind of horrible. But that's a disqualifying association, and we're going to talk more about that in a few minutes. The use of chiropractors, which has a different set of standards. There are specific limitations to what chiropractors can address statutorily. If you want an interesting read, go to the occupations code for chiropractors and find out what it takes to go to chiropractic school. It's the only healthcare profession I'm aware of where the admission requirements to their professional schools is in the statute. And then there are limitations as to what they can address. is this individual certified to be a designated doctor? Has he taken the test? I'm sorry, has he completed the course and he's taken the test? And as we'll talk about in a couple of moments, that has changed a little bit in response to the national health emergency. And this individual has not treated it. For the most part, that has not been an issue in my experience over the last 8 or 10 years. With networks, with guys in the designated doctor program, they're very cognizant of making sure they're not the treating doctor or that they haven't consulted somehow on that particular file. So again, but this is an area, if a partner or if the provider has in any way touched that file, he cannot be the designated doctor in this particular case. Scheduling. If an individual is selected as a designated doctor, you are stuck with that individual, good, bad, or ugly, until that individual is removed by the division. The rule requires that the same clinician be used as a designated doctor unless he is no longer qualified to be a designated doctor or has a disqualifying association or some other rule that does that. So if you get an individual who gives you a completely horrid report and will not listen to reason, and the division won't remove them, you're stuck with that individual. Has this individual maintained his designated doctor certification, or has he failed a test? We're going to talk about testing in a moment, but the reality is the testing is much more challenging. The failure rate of the test is upwards of 80%. That's right, 8 out of 10 people who take the test do not pass it the first time around. The people I know who write tests say that that's a clear indicator of a poorly written test. Failure rates should be in the 17 to 23% range if it's a competent test. 80% failure rate, either the topics weren't covered in training or the questions are too unclear, for the lack of a better term, to pass it. But when you have that level of failure, that's a real problem. Again, I keep harping on the disqualifying association because you don't want the same guy if his cousin or brother-in-law is the treating doctor. And with the advent of the traveling designated doctor program, and those of you who know me, I was the first individual who had physicians go to different locations to do designated doctor work. And when we're having a beer, I'll tell you that story. However, if the traveling designated doctor only has one appointment and there's a 35% chance that one appointment doesn't show, he's not going to drive down to McAllen, Texas from Austin, or he's not going to go up to Beaumont or wherever the case may be for no money, for a no-show. So if this individual has repeatedly not presented himself for appointments, that's a reason to get a different provider. The next step is the medical records. So you made the request, the appointment's scheduled, and now it's about the medical records. Send everything you have. I would tell you, and this was presented to me, I want to say 8 years ago, there are people at the division who believe that adjusters have nothing to do but go to the medical records and take out those documents that don't advance their position. Like, I really believe you as the adjuster is going to say, oh, he doesn't need to see that MRI report. Oh, that op report is not important. We know that's baloney, but the reality is every scrap of paper, you cannot send the designated doctor too much. If it's 5 copies of the same fax cover sheet, so be it. Send it. You're better off saying, I said everything in my file, everything in I can lay my hands on, it went forward. That's the position you need to take. The treating doctor, 127.10 sub 1, is going to be asked to send all that he has. And I know that there are going to be records that the treating doctor has that you do not have. Hopefully between the two, the designated doctor will have everything he needs to make a competent decision. There may be an MRI report, an EMG report, some other PT note, I don't know, that the treating doctor failed to send to you. You don't have it, so you obviously can't send it. he has it and he has sent it. So between the two, hopefully they will mesh and the entirety of the medical record will be there. Send an analysis. We call these a claim file analysis. In terms that I use, it's basically a discharge summary. When I was a house officer, every time somebody was discharged from the hospital, I had to go through the entirety of the medical records and dictate from the first moment they stepped into the emergency room to when they left home, everything that happened. It had to be in one cogent record. So if you get a claim file analysis, and attorney firms do this, and our firm does this, it's a complete summary of the entirety of the medical records. That way, the designated doctor will know everything that happened, at least from your perspective, from the medical records that you have. Your position will be described to the designated doctor in terms of he had a MRI 2 days after the date of injury, which showed bone-on-bone arthritis in the knee after bumping his knee against a tabletop, words to that effect. So it's clear that while we accept that this individual has a significant osteoarthritis, it's not my osteoarthritis. And that's the position the designated doctor has to absorb when he does that. Because as noted in 10 sub B, he has to read everything or he can be eligible for a violation. And when this rule first went in, the division did issue a few violations. To my knowledge, they haven't done it recently. They may have, and I don't know about it, but he can be violated. So when you're cross-examining him on his report, doctor, did you review the medical records? Yes. Did you read the summary that we sent? No. Whoa, red flag. Or he says, yes, I read the summary. Well, if you read the summary, you know that the MRI report documented that he had bone-on-bone arthritis 2 days after the date of injury. With that particular piece of information, why would you say that the arthritis is a function of this little boo-boo that if it was your 4-year-old, you would kiss and make better? So this helps you out a great deal that he has to read it. And if he missed reading it and he missed something, we can overturn his inappropriate report. Furthermore, you need to get every piece of record, the claim file analysis, all the medical records, you need to get them there 3 days prior, or you face a delay in the assessment, and the doctor is required to report you to the division if he doesn't have the medical records 3 days prior. It's a non-compliance issue, and if he doesn't tell the division 3 days prior, oh, I didn't get the medical records, then he could get fined, you could get fined, and the division, everybody in the division can get fined for something. But to summarize, you really need to make sure all the records are sent, the analysis is forwarded, the designated doctor has 3 days to review that, all that information. Will he? That's a separate question, but at least he had the opportunity to do that. Procedures. He has to review the records prior to the visit. There is no time frame for when that occurred. Excuse me. Did the review occur 5 minutes prior to the visit, 3 days prior to the visit? Who knows? But he is required to review the records prior, so he, in theory, has an understanding of what the case is about. Then he needs to perform the necessary testing. As part of his evaluation, he needs to do a comprehensive history, physical examination, review of systems, past medical history, past surgical history, and physical examination, to include vital signs, to include any piece of pathology he can find. And if after all of that, he believes that there is a need for additional testing, this individual did not have an EMG ever. For a low back injury with complaints of pain in their leg, EMGs would be indicated in certain circumstances as outlined by the ODG. He can send that individual for that referral. However, if a designated doctor continually refers the individual for a functional capacity evaluation simply to get an impairment rating, that is not endorsed. Or he sent it for a functional capacity evaluation to determine maximum medical improvement, that's true and unrelated. My ability to stand or sit for 30 minutes because I've got a broken pinky finger has nothing to do with me reaching maximum medical improvement. So keep an eye on it. And if you got one provider, and it's really come down a lot in the last several years, but there were several guys, oh, everybody's getting sent out for an FCE. I'm fairly certain, his cousin owned the FCE device or whatever. But again, if it's an abusive pattern, that's something the division should look at. Multiple requests and multiple reports of maximum improvement, the 69s, may be required. If there are certain clinical situations and situation number 1 gets a report, situation number 2 gets a report, and situation 3 gets a report, they all get it. It's one narrative report, but it's multiple 69s addressing each scenario. This seems so obvious, but it is not. The designated doctor is to do the clinical assessment. There was, a few years ago, one group service company, and they had, open quote, certified tech, close quote, doing the evaluation. I'm sorry, a certified tech is not a physician. He's not an osteopath. He's not a chiropractor. He's a technician. Now, he may know how to do range of motion testing and calculate impairment rating, but there's so much more that goes into the impairment rating than just simple range of motion assessments. So therefore, excuse me, therefore, make sure that it's the designated doctor who does report and not somebody else. We talked about additional testing when necessary to resolve a question. Not because you can or because you want to, but the necessity of the additional testing has to be established. This additional testing is subject to financial disclosure as noted in Rule 180.24. And more importantly, it is not subject to pre-authorization. If the designated doctor feels a repeat MRI is necessary for whatever rationale, he can get that repeat MRI. Simple as that. Needs to be done within 15 days, and the reports have to be forwarded, which is kind of a tight time frame, but pre-authorization is not an issue with this particular regard. So now you've got the request, you've got the appointment, you've got the report, and there is something that is just not quite clear, and you want to get a letter of clarification. The division has really put the kibosh on this because they decide what the question is to be asked. You can send a note to the division saying, please ask the designated doctor to clarify if this is an upper extremity or a whole person impairment rating. Something as straightforward as that. I bring that up because that happened just last week. And if the division decides, yeah, no, we're not going to do that, you're stuck. And if it's an 11% impairment rating because they use an upper extremity value and not the whole person, 11% upper extremity translates to 7% whole person. Now you're talking about 4 points of impairment rating, 12 weeks of checks. But it's up to the division to decide if the question is to be asked and what the question is. You cannot ask leading questions, and you can't ask them to please reconsider your previous decision just on its own face. If there was additional or different medical information, then you can ask them to reconsider. Oh, designated doctor, we got the repeat MRI, which shows that the lumbar fusion has completely healed. There is no swelling, there is no pathology, and therefore, tell me why this individual has not reached maximum medical improvement. You've made your case. There is an appeals panel decision that goes back to 1994, and I'm really dating myself, I get that, that said pain is not an inhibitor to reaching maximum medical improvement. Additionally, if somebody is in the process of getting treatment and there's no reasonable expectation of improvement, he's in a chronic pain program, is this person getting better? No, he's in chronic pain. Therefore, completion of that chronic pain program shouldn't delay reaching maximum medical improvement. And the sooner you get them out of temporary income benefits into impairment income benefits, it's a more cost-efficient protocol. Is the new issue or is it an amended decision? Again, these are fine points that the division points out and applies when seeking letters of clarification. And you have to note the elements of the question as noted in 127.20b. When you submit for a letter of clarification, you need the name of the designated doctor, the reason for the original examination, MMI, impairment, reading disability, yada, 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 the date of the examination, the actual question, and over your signature. Oftentimes, when we're reviewing impairment ratings or other issues, we will propose questions that the designated doctor should clarify. Our narrative report over our signature will not qualify. You're going to have to copy and paste what we put out there, put it on your document, your letterhead, whatever, and go forward with that. But it has to be over your signature as the adjuster for the file. And why you believe clarification is necessary. Hopefully the question itself, it will be self-evident why clarification is necessary, but that's not always the case. And again, the division can modify or alter the question you're asking, so it doesn't even reflect the intent of the question. So you want to be as clear as possible. The questions can't be inflammatory or leading. Again, you just like, dude, really? That's a little bit inflammatory. Leading, doctor, come on. This guy's got this, this, and this. How do you not say that? You can't say things like that. Factual, on target, on point, and with these standards. And if there are additional medical records, submit that, attach them, make sure that the designated doctor has these additional records and why these records are necessary to address the letter of clarification. What used to be a fairly straightforward and a fairly common event has been made much more challenging and difficult, and to my knowledge, doesn't happen nearly as often as it did a few years ago. Designated doctor training. This is a very sore topic with a lot of people. Effective December 2017, under subchapter B, there has to be an application process. Part of that application process has to submit all past certificates of all training. As an individual who has provided designated doctor training back in the mid-90s and early 2000s, it was real different back then. We would have a classroom in a hotel ballroom, 200 guys. We would give the training and we made sure everybody understood the requirements. Now the requirements of the designated doctor, physician designated doctors, are much more stringent. They test these individuals on administrative issues. It's not about just impairment rating and maximum medical improvement. It's about the rules, the statutes, and administrative issues of what they can and cannot do. Interestingly enough, these aren't questions that are posed to a chiropractic designated doctor, and that's a completely separate issue. They have to demonstrate a proficiency in the guides. This is another issue for two reasons. One, we've been using the 4th edition of the guides for almost 20 years now, or more than 20 years, I should say. You would think that since medical school is 4 years and residency is 4 years, that after 20 guys would understand the guides. Yeah, no, because the guides can be poorly written and the interpretation changes on various appeals panel decisions. As an example, in the lower extremity, you're supposed to select one value for ankle flexion and extension. However, there was an appeals panel decision from about 4 years ago that says, no, you get an award for flexion and an award for plantar flexion. That's not what the guides say, but it's what the appeals panel said. So they want the designated doctor to be aware of what the appeals panel has interpreted the guides. The other issue is the statute requires that we use what's called evidence-based medicine. The statute defines evidence-based medicine as the most current clinical information. With that specific definition, let's think about this. There is the 6th edition of the guides that is 10 years old, but it's clearly more current than the 4th edition of the guides that was published in 1994, almost 30 years ago. We're not using the 6th edition of guides, and that's another political boondoggle. But the reality is, if you followed the statute, we should be using the 6th edition. And as an offnote, I would tell you the 6th edition has its pluses and minuses, but overall, I believe it's a better program and a better set of guides to calculate the impairment rating. They have to use the adaptive treatment guidelines. For treatment, you need to refer to the official disability guidelines. And I just found out the other day that official disability guidelines, the legacy version that everybody in Texas has been using for the last 20 odd years, whatever it's been, is going away at the end of March. March 31, 2021. They're going to ODG by MCG, which is a cleaner, newer web page dealie, which I don't understand. But in talking with the folks from ODG yesterday, they tell me that the data itself is essentially the same. It's easier to find and it's cleaner and easier to copy and things like that. You know, they're trying to make a good situation better, but there you go. But relative to treatment, the designated doctor has to refer to the official disability guidelines. And another point to make here is it's the official disability guidelines, not official disability carved in stone. I've seen on a number of occasions, oh, he's only had 34 sessions of post-surgical physical therapy for his shoulder, and the ODG says he can have 36. Therefore, he's out at maximum medical improvement. Well, when you look at the physical examination showing his flexion is only 32 degrees because he's got an arthrofibrosis and statutory maximum medical improvement is a week away, those additional 2 sessions aren't going to change anything. You have to think clinically and cogently and not just arbitrarily as outlined in the ODG. Return to work, well, we can address that in a designated doctor process, not today, is the MD guidelines. And again, the ODG has duration narratives and duration data, but we cannot refer to that data in terms of assigning return to work guidelines. And again, return to work is off the table as of today relative to the designated doctor process. You must be licensed in Texas. You have to at some point been a physician. You do not have to be a physician in active practice today. You could be retired and be a designated doctor, but you have to have a Texas license. There is an exception to that on the out-of-state things on a case-by-case basis, which we talked about a moment ago. And you have to have a copy of the guides, a book that is out of print. Go to Amazon and see if you can buy a copy of the 4th edition of the guides. I dare you. The training has changed, particularly on focusing on the date of maximum medical improvement. The philosophy has changed somewhat based on several appeals panel decisions. And again, the designated doctor has to be aware of those current determinations. The designated doctor training. Recertification is required every 2 years. I don't have to take my driver's license every 2 years, but physicians have to take this training, and it really doesn't change, particularly in the last year when nothing's happened because of the whole pandemic, but there are people doing it. You need 12 hours of additional training. And up until recently, and I'll get that in a moment, it was Friday and a Saturday morning. So a physician who wanted to be a designated doctor had to leave their practice from El Paso or McAllen or Tyler and come to Austin. I don't know if you've ever stayed in a hotel in Austin recently. It ain't cheap. Coming to Austin ain't cheap. Having dinner in Austin ain't cheap. There is McDonald's, but who wants to do that? So you got to get this additional 12 hours and then taking the training course for 2 days. It just becomes financially onerous to give up a day of their practice Thursday, a second day of their practice Friday, and then spend Saturday here in Austin and go back home. So for a physician, it becomes a particularly expensive event when they're not getting that many files. Several of the physicians that work with me in clinical compensation consultants continue to maintain their designated doctor status, and they complain about it all the time because it costs them money, and they really do not get a return on investment for their time. Different conversation. And on top of that, they have to pass a test. And as I mentioned earlier, the testing is a challenge. The failure rate is 80%. Holy cow. If you had to take your adjuster boards again and knew that 8 out of 10 of your colleagues were going to fail, you'd have to say, what's going on with this test? But that's just the reality of it. If a designated doctor, if his certification is within 45 days of expiring, he cannot be appointed the designated doctor. Take to that the training is was only given in limited situations. That became a problem. Now they've gone online. There's a few more jumps to go through. I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. I apologize. There's a few more hoops to go through, and there's no dings on any of their ticket. They can't have any complaints against them or sanctions against their medical licenses or whatever. Effective September 1st, 2020, The designated doctor training course is online. There are 5 sessions you have to attend, anywhere from 1 to 3 hours per session. They're getting their 12 hours. It costs $120, which is about a third of what it used to cost, which is not too bad. And it's a combination of live webinar, which they have to attend, as well as video training. And that's what it takes to go complete the designated doctor training. The good news, you can do it in your office, and it's a little bit more flexible. I don't think they burn a whole day on Friday to make it happen. It's more on the weekend. A request for recertification can be denied for unnecessary referrals. We talked earlier about some providers were getting way too many functional capacity evaluations. That was used as a basis to say, you know what, dude, you're out of here. You're not on the designated doctor list. There's a history of complaints. I have to tell you that we don't do this anymore. I used to be in the designated doctor, traveling designated doctor business, and we had one complaint that I just have to share with you. We were going to McAllen, Texas in August. And if there's anything you can say about McAllen, Texas in August is it's hot. So the complaint, and I kid you not, the complaint that was sent to us was, how could he be a designated doctor? He was not wearing a white lab coat. Wait a minute. If there's anything I want to do in McAllen, Texas in August, putting on more clothes isn't on that list. But that was a complaint that was filed with the division, and they had to follow up with us. When I got the phone call, the woman who talked to us said, wait a minute, can you repeat that? I was incredulous. Yeah, I know. I've got to follow up on this. And they knew it was absurd, but that's the process. So if you have a provider who has a history of complaints, doesn't show, he was rude, he didn't touch me, he didn't examine me, yada, yada, yada. Some complaints are valid. Other complaints are not valid. But if they have a history of complaints, it can be the basis for the division to exclude that individual on the designated doctor list. If their reports are overturned. Part of what we do here at Clinical Compensation Consultants is look at designated doctor reports. Is their determinations defensible? Is it accurate? Are the impairment ratings correctly calculated? As I mentioned a few moments ago, there was one designated doctor who forgot to convert upper extremity to whole person. The 69 said 11%. You do the calculation, it really should have been 7%. You know, 4 points at 3 weeks, that's a chunk of change. So you have to look at it. If the designated doctor's reports are overturned by folks like myself or by the hearing officer process or the appeals panel, that is a real big red flag. I'm getting this guy tossed. If the designated doctor demonstrates a lack of ability to do the impairment rating, excuse me, to do the impairment rating. And most guys can do it. They don't do it accurately all the time, or they fudge a little bit, or they forget to round to the nearest 10 degrees, little things like that. But if they demonstrate a complete lack of an ability to do impairment rating, then there you go. And if the appointments are not kept timely, there are strict criteria for when particularly follow-up appointments have to be completed. This is problematic in the traveling designated doctor business because if I go to McAllen, I see 7 people and 2 didn't show. As per the division, I have to go back to McAllen within a week to see those 2 people. And if they didn't show once, so they'll show the second time. And again, I'm only going to get 2 appointments. It's not worth the airplane ticket down. So I push them back. There are other providers who rely on the designated doctor program as their sole source of income. So they're always shucking and jiving, moving things around, scheduling here, rescheduling, and trying to keep it all straight. And the appointments aren't done in a timely fashion, which hurts you, the adjuster. So you want to make sure the appointments are kept, they're not changed, and things like that. If the designated doctor has a track record, that could be another reason the division can say, see you later, dude. And of course, the ever-present disqualifying associations. I put in lack of confidentiality because this is a true story. There was an individual who flew to El Paso to perform designated doctor appointments. On his way back from El Paso on the company airplane, those of you know Southwest, he was dictating his reports. Unfortunately for him, the individual sitting behind him on that Southwest airplane was a member of the Division of Workers' Compensation who heard this guy dictating, and the guy mentioned the injured employee's name. With that, he was brought up, it was discussed, and he was removed from the designated doctor list for 6 months for violating the confidentiality of those injured employees. I haven't heard of it since then, but it's out there, and I just thought I'd share that story with you. And anything else that the designated doctor does, it can be a reason for getting him tossed from the list. The division has a fairly wide authority to make that happen. Out-of-state designated doctor, the division can waive any requirement. If your injured employee moves to Wheeling, West Virginia from Waco, Texas, and they can only find one guy who's not even close to being appropriate, but can do the impairment rating, the division can appoint him as a designated doctor, irrespective of every other criterion that's listed. They can waive any requirement. It's a case-by-case situation. Obviously, you want to get the impairment rating or the determination of maximum medical improvement and the impairment rating as quickly as possible. So sometimes you have to hold your breath and take it. Who gets what? This is a real challenging issue for the division, particularly in the face of a declining number of physicians. You must have the credentials appropriate to the issue in question. If you are a physical medicine and rehabilitation provider and the designated doctor is asked to address the issue of pregnancy, not sure how that can become a compensable injury, whole separate conversation. But a PM&R guy cannot be a designated doctor when the issue of pregnancy and maximum medical improvement is on the table. You must meet the requirements of the labor code 4080043, except for chiropractors who must meet the labor code 4080045. And then the applicable division rules are noted. And again, my personal favorite, no disqualifying associations. So therefore, the use of chiropractors as designated doctors is limited to hands, lower extremities, upper extremities, feet, spine, and torso. If you look at their statute, chiropractic is limited to the care of the spine and musculoskeletal system. That is all they're legally allowed to do. We know that there are some providers who think that, well, the spine innervates the pancreas, so therefore I can treat diabetes because the spinal nerve root innervates the pancreas. Now, that doesn't fly. There have been decisions where chiropractors cannot do electrodiagnostic testing as much as they wanted to do it beyond their scope of practice. So if you get a designated doctor he's a chiropractor asked to address a penetrating eye injury, raise the red flag, say no, not valid. They can't do that. But if it's a spine and musculoskeletal system, i.e. hands, upper extremities, lower extremities, feet, spine, torso, then that would be applicable. Carpal tunnel syndrome. I know we don't see too many cases of carpal tunnel syndrome, but carpal tunnel is a peripheral neuropathy outside the statutory scope of practice. Therefore, while it is the wrist and upper extremity, it is a peripheral nervous system disorder and not a spinal musculoskeletal system disorder. And that, again, a chiropractor should not be appointed to serve as a designated doctor in that particular scenario. They can address dental issues, eye issues, head, eyes, ears, nose, and throat, HENT, mental or behavioral disorders, or tendon lacerations. Quite frequently, we see the low back strain become anxiety, depression, and a variety of psychiatric maladies. If that's part of the compensable injury, and that's been either incorporated, accepted, and an issue that the designated doctor has to address, then a chiropractor is not eligible to serve as a designated doctor with these mental or behavioral disorders as per the rule. Again, I'm not saying what the division may or may not do. I'm just trying to outline what the rules say. Similarly, chiropractors cannot do traumatic brain injuries, spinal cord injuries, severe burns, complex regional pain syndrome, fractures, infectious disease, chemical exposure, or cardiac disease. This is a broad spectrum. It doesn't always happen, and because of a variety of issues, they may get assigned, but you need, if this pops up, you really do need to talk to your attorney or counsel in this case. Look, I got a chiropractor trying to tell me that this guy got hit in the head with a golf ball 6 years ago, and he's giving him a Chapter 4 impairment rating. Outside the scope of practice, he doesn't know about it, and should this guy be employed? And that's a question you need to have with your counsel. They must be board certified. Section 127.130 outlines what boards for what injuries. Again, a physician may be board certified in rheumatology. He cannot address dermatologic issues in situations like that. And again, I just want to go over the listed disqualifying associations as noted in 127.140. Any item or issue that can influence a designated doctor. Income or compensation of any kind. There was a case where a designated doctor went to Abilene. The address they used for the designated doctor appointment was on this street on one side. The treating doctor used a separate address around the corner. It was the same building and the same office. The injured employee mentioned, I know this place. And that was a disqualifying association, and that designated doctor was excluded from that particular case because the traveling designated doctor was compensating the treating doctor or received some compensation in terms of that office space, and that was determined to be a disqualifying association. Contracts or agreements. There are several services that provide designated doctor services throughout the state. They recruit providers. They do everything for them, soup to nuts. They take their piece of the action. However, if a provider in El Paso belongs to the same service group as a designated doctor in McAllen, that's a disqualifying association. These two guys wouldn't know each other if they bumped into each other in the airport. They have never met, they've never shaken hands, but because they've got that contract or agreement, that is a disqualifying association. Are there personal or family connections? And in some of the smaller towns, that can be an issue. Networks. There is a growing use of networks in the treatment of it. If a provider is if the network treats this individual, the designated doctor, if he's affiliated with that network, cannot serve as a designated doctor. And again, any item, any consideration that I didn't mention that could be in any regard perceived as altering an unbiased opinion is a disqualifying association. So if you go back and look at the records and you see that there's 2 copies of the same letterhead for the same medical practice. One is a letterhead from the designated doctor, and one is a letterhead from whatever. That is, even if there's no correlation, that letterhead thing alone is enough to toss that designated doctor appointment. You have 5 days to tell the division if there is a disqualifying association. So again, be cognizant of the records, cognizant of the report, and if something pops up, let them know as quickly as you possibly can. There are a number of requirements that the designated doctor has to meet. If you get a complaint from an injured employee or know that the designated doctor failed in his responsibilities, hopefully you can get his report turned aside. There are way too many designated doctor reports that do not advance the overall clinical situation. You scratch your head and you wonder, how could he possibly come up with that? It happens all the time. We all see that. But if you get that complaint or he failed in his responsibilities, get that report turned. Section 127 and 210 outlines the violation and sanctions. There are 15 items, and if that designated doctor is a member of a service company, that service company has to meet all those criterion as well. The designated doctor can't say, oh, these guys did that, therefore it's not my responsibility. It is his responsibility. He owns the report and everything attached to it. They really don't care who did what. It has to be there. There are standards for the reports. Note the questions and note the answer. Did the designated sufficiently explain to a reasonable degree of medical probability or an evidence-based medicine standard his answer? because I said so, candidly, I know we all have children and we all tell our kids at some point, because I said so. All I know is because I said so stopped working for my father as soon as I could outrun him. Once I was faster than he was, I didn't care because I said so. Then it's the same thing. I literally have seen reports or talked to providers and they use that, well, that's how I do it. Not anything but basin, but because, well, that's how I do it. See you later. Not sufficient, not good enough. Evidence-based medicine is the statutory requirement and the standard we have to hold these guys to. Do they cite the guides? Do they cite ODG, MD guidelines? Or if those three items didn't cover it, is there a citation from the literature supporting their position? The purpose here is that it's an objective, independent assessment based on the best possible literature. And if it's not that, and that reports, and we see that all too frequently, if it's not that standard, then it needs to be looked at. And of course, do they list all the medical records that they reviewed? Additionally, dating back to March 2019, a designated doctor performance review of every designated doctor is being undertaken. The medical director of the division, and he's got the medical quality assurance panel, they look at these things. They randomly select 5 reports for review. They evaluate a variety of criterion, and they issue reports on how well these guys did. It's kind of like the performance-based oversight you see for carriers, adjusters, other things, and they're doing that to hopefully maintain the highest quality of designated doctor activity. Whew. So in summary, the rules are in place effective December 2018. There are more specific standards for both the designated doctor and you, the adjuster, in the designated doctor process. The good news is there is a clear basis to hold their feet to the fire. Make them do everything they are required to do. And that's the way you get a report that you deserve and are entitled to and advances the case as appropriate. If they don't do it, then the report gets overturned and we find somebody who can do it correctly. Always, thank you so much for your time and attention. I appreciate you all being here, listening to me. Any questions at any time, please feel free to call me. I always have my iPhone. It's not too far away. I'm happy to take your questions, solve whatever issue we can, and go forward. Or send me an email. Or as my social media marketing director says, wait a minute, that's LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. And I'm not sure what the other two are because I'm way too far away from 18. I am not a millennial. I grew up on a rotary telephone, so I don't know what those things are. But are there any questions now? Alex, are there any questions? Anybody post anything? No. All right, guys. I appreciate your time. If you have any questions, please send me a note. Give me a call. Happy to answer them. Thank you so much.